Hey, everybody, this is Vera Sadler with VLS Coaching Services and Women of Life Ministries. And I am here again with my bestie, Lady T, Tina Clark from Trenton, New Jersey. And as we told you, this is November, the month of November, and we are talking about naked and unashamed. And this is going to be, again, a sensitive conversation, but a much needed conversation to expose things that a lot of people don't want to talk about online. They don't want to talk about it in families. They don't want to talk about it in the church. They don't want to talk about it, period. But we have been brave enough to come online and talk about these conversations that a lot of people don't want to have. So, Lady T, we're going to jump right back in and pick up where we left off last week. Last week, we were talking about exposing the shared secret shame. And we called it that shared secret shame because many of us have been violated, have had sexual violations against us, and it's secret because we don't want to talk about it. And we ended up talking about how do we come forward? How do we expose it? How do we tell about it? And again, we wanted people to be reminded that when you have been had a violation against you, it is not your fault. That was one of the big takeaways. But we want to pick back up before we go into this week's discussion and talk about some coping mechanisms because we didn't get to that part of the discussion. And again, my girlfriend, Lady T here, Tina, she is a mental health nurse. She has seen trauma. Many of us have seen trauma. We both have been victims of sexual violations. And so that's another reason why this topic is so important to us to expose it because we know how it played out in our lives. So, Tina, can you just pick that up? And before conversation, we really wanted to revisit again last week and talk about even when you begin to expose or when you come and deal with your trauma, there has to be some coping mechanisms, and there's some good coping mechanisms to try to deal with what's going on in your life.
Right. So, again, thank you, Vera. Thank you, V. It's just an honor to be
You
here.
might need to talk up a little louder so that we can hear you.
Okay, how about now? Is that better?
Yeah, that's a little better. Yeah.
So, greetings. It's just an honor to be in your presence once again, V. You know how much I love you, and I'm proud of what you're doing. So, just to tag off and pick up from where we left off last week, certainly we can't cover everything, but one important point is, you hear about these heinous situations, and there's certainly a spectrum of what has happened, to people. Again, there's people who have been gang raped, by multiple people, and some things you just a whole range, and everyone doesn't experience it the same. So we talked last week about how you are the expert of your life, right? Even though we use other people and other people are there as support, right? But you are the one who determines like what is meaningful and helpful to you, right? And how you experience it. And some people, with the same experiences don't perceive it so much as a trauma and may not have PTSD, even with the same experiences. And other people with, experiences that we might deem lesser might end up with PTSD. The research shows that it sometimes is correlated to whether or not the person experienced it, the degree of violence that they attributed to it, right? Okay. Whether they experience it as like a violent assaultive episode sometimes factors in to whether they have that PTS type reaction to it or not, right? But again, it's still a violation of your person or violation and how you deal with it. Again, some people don't feel the need to even go into it further. Some people innately have these stronger coping mechanisms and have a certain level of resiliency. And even as a child or, they just have a sense that it's wrong and they really are able to internalize and stand strong in their self. So everyone doesn't have that same need. But I guess what I wanted to address further is that we speak to not just counseling, right? Because counseling is just one mode and way, and we don't want to suggest that everybody has to now go into counseling or that is the only way. Even if you chose to go further to address it, I would say that consider and I reached out to quite a few people about this issue, just wanting some feedback in terms of what the research says as well as what real people like our people that we know are saying. And I gotta say that it's certainly connected. They talked about how common it is, that they can all concur that it's a common or somewhat common, like kind of like everybody knows somebody. So this is that kind of thing that even if it doesn't affect you personally, more than
You
likely it's
know,
someone that you know, right? That it
mhm.
affects someone close to you, not just someone like as an associate, right? So these are important issues to be a resource, not just for yourself, but for those you have a close friend. It's important, right? Some of us have mothers who come from a generation where they never had the permission to address these things. So again, as we gain insight and become more enlightened, we're not just a resource for ourselves. This is enabling you to be able to support others in your circle of influence in a positive way, right? So it's never just self. The Bible talks about giving liberally, and that's not just about money, right? It's because whenever you have fruit, whenever you benefit from something, then it becomes upon us to liberally give that, and that's the measure of how our life gets fruit in
Yes,
terms of that.
yes.
So positive coping will also come down to things like some people enjoy music, right? You ever see kids who are going through a lot and they'll be very active in their sports or very active in their music or very active in art. And to the degree that someone is able to find an area of outlet, an area of release, an area where they find joy, right? Then we're talking about coping. We're talking about music, movement, exercise. We're talking about speaking, um, meditating, writing, journaling, all these types of things, right? And we're talking about partnering. We're talking about people help people. There's something about communal efforts that makes someone realize that they're not alone, that makes someone have that sense of,
Mhm.
wow, I'm not in isolation. I'm not the only one. Because there's something that the enemy does try to do as a tactic that is effective is when he can make you feel alone and isolated and like it's just you. And, the Bible says it's really nothing common. So we're not alone. And even that is an aspect of comfort and healing. But that's the next point is sometimes we talk about coping, sometimes we talk about strategies, but we know the world may not have that perspective, but the Bible talks about us being new and made new. So we are also on a road to being healthy and healed, right? Not just
Yeah.
coping and being distracted from it, but we're
Oh,
about
that's
being
so good.
healed and delivered and set free, right? Not just on this eternal road to coping,
Because
right?
sometimes when we just talk about coping, it's almost like we just hold it. Some people look at coping as okay. Give you an example. This water bottle. So I'm going to cope with the fact that I have this thing. It happened to me and I'm holding it. And I know, knowing you and knowing me, the conversations we had, we're not talking about coping with, I had this trauma, I had this thing happen to me. So I'm going to cope with it by holding on to it. We're talking about finding, like when you just mentioned the exercise, you just mentioned the music, you just mentioned the art. We're talking about finding a way to let it go.
Right.
We're talking
Release.
about finding a way, and you just said it, healing, healthy, release,
Mhm.
deliverance. All that is methods and mechanisms to now I'm letting it go. So I know I'm not holding it. I'm finding a way to release, be set free from the bondage, the hold it has on me. Because when we don't find that way to, and so we're talking about when you say coping, I just really wanted to bring that out, and I'm so glad you mentioned that. We're on the road to recovery, and recovery doesn't mean it's mine, it's my baby, and I have to carry it for the rest of my life. We're talking about I'm finding a way to process so I can find a way to finally release.
Mm-hmm. And you hit it because it's an interesting thing that the mind does, and again, it's all to protect yourself, right?
Right.
But and I'm going to use the example of a child, even though these things don't always happen in a child. You can recognize when someone experiences a trauma, you don't have your rational reasoning mind working in the same capacity. So I'm using the example of a child because it's relevant even to an adult. When you're under trauma, you're compromised. Your reasoning is compromised. So again, so a child who goes through these things, right, is not able to deal with it the same way an adult would be able to deal with something. Like if someone comes to you and if a child comes to you and it didn't happen to you, you're able to recognize what's going on. You can, refer them. You can understand you understand it differently than the person who's internalizing and experiencing, right? But there's something that happens over time, right? There's something that happens with a victim that sometimes being a victim on its own, it has a sort of, we have victim rights. Right. We can get so used to being a victim until it's almost like we have a right, not just with ourselves. It's a little pity party thing that goes on, a little something that you get a little toxic form of you know, I don't want to say you enjoy it, but you get used to it. It's a comfort zone, right? And you
Mm,
don't necessarily want to let it go. And so
mm,
now here we're talking the language of deliverance And healing and deliverance can only come with forgiveness. It's just like when the Jews, young lady wrote her diary, and we hear about the horrible, heinous things that happen, but you still have to forgive. That is the whole core of releasing that bitterness, is to forgive. It's not about them. You forgive for you. Mm-hmm. And that is the beginning point of our complete healing.
So you mentioned something that will help us jump into the next segment of this conversation, and forgiveness, because forgiveness really isn't, and we know biblically, forgiveness is the core of everything we live for, because if we can't forgive, the Bible tells us that how can Christ, how can we expect him to forgive us? But forgiveness really, if we don't drive nothing else, when we're talking about this hope, this healing, this restoration for ourselves, forgiveness really isn't about the offender. It's not about the victimizer. It really is about us. And I teach a class. I teach anger management, and a part of my anger management and my relapse prevention class, I talk about forgiveness. And I use this analogy of the hook. And some people may have seen this big fish hook. And when we talk about forgiveness, it's you're on that hook. It's not the person who's offended you. And if you don't forgive, you remain on the hook while the person continues going on doing what they're doing, because it's your mind, your thoughts, your actions. You're triggered. They're not even triggered, but you're triggered. So you remain on this hook because everything affects you because you don't forgive. And when we don't forgive, when we try to move on, we now are our relationships become toxic.
So good. So good, baby.
Let's jump into this.
So good. Can I just touch on that? What you just said, that just brings another level of clarity to the point about release. Because when we think of forgiveness, we often think of releasing the other person, releasing the situation. But you just took it to another level because you're also releasing yourself. Wow, that's so good.
Yeah, because we think that we're letting the person off the hook for what they did, but you're letting yourself off the hook to be wounded constantly. So you see that you see a person, or you think about a person, and you're constantly engaged in your mind. You said your mind. You're constantly engaged in your mind, your thoughts, your emotions are always wrapped up. When you forgive, you are releasing yourself from being constantly enthralled in this emotional, spiritual, physical, because we know while this is going on, every part of you is caught up in it. So you're releasing, as you just said, yourself from being captivated, caught up in, captured by this event. And it's almost like the event is taking over all the time, over and over and over and over and over. But we release ourselves. It doesn't mean the person didn't do it. It doesn't mean that they're not guilty. They have to answer to God, if necessary, they answer to the law, and they answer to their own conscience. Some people think they don't.
What about those whose consciences have been seared? Again, like you said, that's something that is between them and the Lord. But I want to speak to the ones that you just said, who do have a conscience, right? And who are grappling with being a victimizer, right? Because we're talking about the victim, but we can't have a conversation about a victim and not recognize that there's a victimizer in the room. And they're also in the dark, right? They're also hidden. They're also not getting the help that they need. And there's a concept that we have in health care that says prevention is one way to address cure. In fact, it's in the HIV population. They actually have medication to give in order for someone to prevent someone who has risky lifestyles. They will administer and give them a prescription for medication to prevent HIV, right? And that is a form of what the literature says is a form of cure. So similarly, if we have victimizers, right, what is happening for them? Like, where's their safe place to go? Because this is just as real as the issue of we as the victimizers, victims in this case, victims. Where do these victimizers go? Like, even again, back to the church. I just do not agree that there's no safe place for them to go, right?
Healing.
To express what's going on in their mind, what they struggle with. A safe place for them to say, I haven't done it, or, but I want help, or to get that supportive system to say, this is what I struggle with, right? we do not allow people to have a safe place, right? So how does that, why are we not creating
A safe
churches?
a safe place for them to say, I need help, I need healing, I need deliverance, I need to talk to somebody. We haven't.
Right,
Before they become victimizers, right?
right.
They have it in their mind, they have these thoughts, and we haven't. And that's an excellent point that you brought out, that people are living in bondage, and because they don't get the help, then they go out and they become, they victimize, they become, and then you have a whole bunch of victims out there who have suffered at their hands,
Mhm,
man.
mhm,
Or
mhm.
they have been victims at one time and they have hidden in secret, and now they are the victimizers, and they've created this cycle of toxicity that we want to hit
Cycle,
on today.
cycle. The cycle part is so big, right? That cycle part is so big. With hurt people,
Uh-huh.
right? That we heard about it. I know it sounds cliche, but it is so real, right? When the more you get exposed to some of these stories, right? Like, of course, the more egregious ones we get exposed to and we see, and then when you start digging backwards to see what happened, and you start finding what happened to that person and what their history is, there's often links. I'm not saying every time, but there's often links to say, okay, this is what happened to them, and why is this person doing that? What's in their story? Not to excuse it, right? But just for us to better understand, and for us to make those steps available and resources available earlier in the chain to break the cycle,
Uh-huh.
because that's really the goal. Now, onto this forgiveness point you made. Um, Many of us, some of us like counseling, some of us don't like counseling. And again, we don't want to present that as the end all for what everyone is going to do. But the gentleman who wrote the book, the one that I gave you, Love After Heartbreak,
Uh-huh.
you have it.
Let's put that up so
Stephen,
everybody can see
he
the
has a French
resource.
name, Stephen LeBois. What I love about his book is he goes through a process and gives you a process to deal with forgiveness. Men, women, whoever can use this process. Doesn't have to be sexual victimization related, but any issue really. It's essential for us to have a way that we utilize. What are we going to do when we have something that has offended us or hurt us, right? To release that thing, to get it out of yourself and get it out of your life and move on. And his process, I thought it was very straightforward. It was simple. Anybody can do it without counseling, right? But it's a way to help purge yourself of
Uh-huh.
really those issues. And you can see him online. He's a great guy, but I thought that particular piece in his book was a very effective and helpful tool for in the area of forgiveness.
I
But
love
on
that
to
you're saying that we need to have a way and a method, that we just can't sit there and say, I got this, because many of us don't have it, and we try to do things on our own, and that's where we make the mistake. And if you don't want to go to a room and sit in therapy and stuff, get a resource. And thank you for sharing these resources with us, because when we look at it and say, okay, I'm going to try this, and you use a proven method that has helped hundreds and thousands of individuals come out of the trauma, out of the chaos, and no longer continuing that the toxic behavior and perpetuating it generation to generation. We want to use these resources, male, female, whoever it is, and say, look, let's step out of where we are and stop the cycle. So here, love after heartbreak. Guys, if you're listening in, women, you're listening in, young people, try reading. I mean, sometimes we've gotten to a population that doesn't like to read. Everything's electronic. But I'm telling you, I love to read. I love getting resources. I love listening. If you have to get it on Audible, some of these people are on Audible. Some people have ebook. Get the resources. So this is just one. Come on, keep talking to us, Lady T. We need this information.
and the other thing that you mentioned earlier is about when we don't do some of these things and we don't purge and we don't address, we can end up in toxic relationships. And again, there's a connection between that and the cycles you spoke about, because and now I'm going to have to reveal myself as a person who has been very toxic in relationships and the negative effects of that in my life. But the Bible talks about um, a man would rather be on the rooftop of the house than in the house with a nagging woman. But who wants to say I was the nagging woman, right? Who wants to say I'm the toxic woman? I can say that, right? But not understanding what it means, not understanding really what's happening. So basically, um, what happens often is that what we've been modeled, what we've seen in our own home, right? If we've seen toxic, it becomes normalized, right? And if that's what we know, then yes, that's going to be what we reproduce, right? If we've seen it. Another area that it happens is when someone's been abused, oppressed, whether it's emotional or physical, because we're now learning more about emotional. We've only in the past acknowledged physical abuse, but emotional abuse can be just as damaging, sometimes the residual effects are even more so, right? Then that person can often take the polar opposite approach to ensure that that doesn't happen to them, and then they become hostile in their relationships, overly aggressive in their relationships, right? So it's if you've been modeled it, if you've been minimized, marginalized, and then it's if you have come from a background of perfectionism. Let's say your parents were really perfectionist and hard on you and critical, and so then that critical voice is always playing in your mind, and so you're critical with others and you're critical with yourself, right? So that's another way that that toxic mindset can come into your life and you not even realize it. So I tell you how it played out for me. So I'm a person who's very energetic. I'm a person who's communicative. I think fast. I do everything fast, right? So I've been in leadership a lot. I go to work. I do what I need to do. I come home ready for it, ready for it. I come home and that same energy comes with me. Okay, what do we need to do? This, that. Okay, what happened here? How come that? What? That same energy that is effective in one role, one realm, necessary, but I didn't understand the transition. And then when you come home, that is not healing. That is not nurturing. That is not the energy that he needed to be able to enjoy me as his wife, as his helpmate, right? That did not allow me to
Right.
to be a support and loving, a safe place for him, a place for him to, let down and relax. It was me being critical. And let's just know, I didn't pass the mark either. I was critical with myself, right? I was not just critical of what the kids didn't do and what he didn't do. I was critical with myself. That is not a healthy place of learning for them, for me, for anyone, right? So that is why we must get naked and unashamed and understand these cycles so that we can get free and we can live in a healthy, holistic relationships, right? When
Yes.
you don't know what you
Yes.
don't know.
Yes. Wow, that's a mouthful. So, what happened to you translated into how you viewed yourself and how you viewed others. And so, when you got into a relationship, it just continued. And you didn't, but one of the things I think what you're saying is you didn't even realize that was what you were doing.
Oh no. If you would have,
Because
I
we
would say,
did, like you
what's
said,
wrong?
I don't know what I didn't know.
I was like, what's wrong? Oh, I just said that, you didn't get it done. So I was clueless, like a blind side, right? Totally blind, right? In fact, I'm feeling like almost victimized myself. Here I am, the victimizer, and I'm feeling like, well, what's wrong, right? I did not
Why are you
understand it.
saying that? Why are you behaving like this? Why do you think I'm, yeah,
All I
but it's
said
because,
was, because what I said was true. So there was a difference between recognizing that what I said and what I brought to the table was true, than to recognize everything that's true doesn't need to be said, right? And even if it needs to be said, I may not be the one to say it to my husband, right? To the king of my home. I may not be the one. The Lord can send someone. And sometimes there's a way to say something without, you can be quiet and silence can serve, right? There's just so much more to it than just the content of what you said, because we know communication anywhere is 80% of it is not just what you said, right? And so those wonderful lessons that we learn.
uh-oh. Well, hopefully Lady T will be back real quick. I'm sure her internet just did something. But I do know the other thing about toxic relationships is that we come into relationships with false expectations. We expect things from our spouses, or we expect things, we have a false expectation. And then what breeds false, when you have false expectations, it breeds disappointment. So I know that, and I had to learn that the hard way that when you don't deal with your trauma, and when you don't deal, or you come into what she was just mentioning about perfectionism, it breeds a sense of false expectations. And then you take that out also and on the mate. One of the things that I realize that happens is that, have you ever heard somebody say, well, I want my mate to be this, 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 this. And I'm looking for, especially as women, I'm looking for a man that can do this. I'm looking for a man that can do that. I'm looking for a man that has all this going on, but they never have dealt with why. Who told you that this person has to be all this? And sometimes it's because we have all these expectations that aren't realistic, and it comes from our toxic way of thinking because we haven't dealt with what has caused us to believe or think or behave or expect all of this stuff. So I just think that, and I know that we have to deal with what is driving us, the force behind what is driving us, the force behind what is making us believe or think that it is going, that that's what's proper, that's the way. We're going to continue on with just waiting and believing that Lady T can hop back on and finish this conversation with us. um, I'm going to hit her up. I believe, sometimes these conversations or our internet and our technology acts up. But if you have a question, here she comes. There you go. We adding you back on here.
Oh, somebody's mad.
Yes. Well, what I was saying when your call or your internet fell off was that another thing that happens in these relationships and the toxicity is that not only do we come into it and we don't know what we don't know, but we have false expectations. So here,
Mm,
and I was saying we have a lot of women that believe, oh, I want my husband to be this way, this way, this way, or men too. I'll throw that in there this time. We have men that say my wife has to be this, 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 because of either our past hurts, our past pains, and whatever. We haven't dealt with our own issues, so we expect this other person to be a certain way, and because of our false, or society makes us think a certain way, we haven't dealt with ourselves. We haven't dealt with what we really need
mm,
or peeled back our layers. So we come in
mm.
with these god awful, I'll just say them, they're awful expectations, and our relationships fail, or we can't even get a mate because we have these unrealistic expectations,
Unrealistic.
or our relationships become very toxic. Our behavior in a relationship, you meet someone and your thought pattern is so toxic.
Toxic.
Your behavior, the way you treat someone, is so toxic because your expectations are so off.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
And sometimes it's because of your past that you haven't dealt with. You're treating, have you met people that treat this person like their past because they haven't dealt
Mm,
with their past?
mm,
You're
mm,
treating them like your victimizer.
mhm. So that's yes, that's a great point because again, that's what I one of the examples I gave is if someone who's been abused emotionally or physically, now their reaction, their response to that is is an extreme polarized response, but now their future relationships are dealt with out of a no one's going to treat me like that again. No one.
Mhm.
And preemptively, right? They're bringing a hostile tone, right? They're
Wow.
bringing a negative, right? And no one's perfect. So, therefore, while you want to be able to be on the alert and understand, right? You don't want to repeat negative cycles, of course, but that doesn't mean every time someone falters or makes a mistake that you can just slam them into a category and oh you're this or you're that and you're labeling them from this idealistic pedestal that they won't have faults and failures and mistakes and need support to grow in a healthy way just like you do, right? Everybody wants um, something that's finished cooking, right? Nobody wants to work and labor and serve and take care of something to make it beautiful and put it. They want a finished cake, but we're not
That's
finished,
good.
right? We are still being made. He's making us, and we want people to love us through and love on us and support us. Man, well, everybody. I mean, this venture that we're on, we're talking to people, we're listening to people, we're hearing people out. And the cry I hear from everyone, men included, we get a little older, you get a little older, and everybody
Yes,
will
ma'am.
talk to you. They'll talk to you real easy. So the young men, they call me auntie, and they're just talking, and all they want is the same thing. They want a safe place. They want a safe place to be heard, to emote, to grow, to say, I don't know what to do. I'm scared. I feel afraid of it. They want what you want, right? And we want this idealistic. I'm talking to my sisterhood, right? That we often have brought into the commercialized fairy tale that we see in movies or sitcoms or whatever it is. It's
Tell the truth.
so fake, right? We brought into this idea, right? And that we just want to be the princess who fits in and they carry us off into the sunset, right? And
Oh my
that
gosh, it's
doesn't
so
put
good
us in a
saying that.
position to nurture what God created us to do, right? He gave us a womb for a reason. We know how to produce life,
Wow.
guys. We know how to produce
Wow.
life. Anything we come in contact with, He's given us the gifts and the skill set to make it better. Like, come on, help. That means we help it. We like make this thing thrive. Like it was doing on level 3, and we take it and we like, listen, let's go, right? And that's done in different ways because people need different things. Some men, they just need that home environment to be set, right? They can
Right.
just go out and ring, right? You working in the marketplace, but you still, if that's his priority, we can still find out how to meet that for him. That doesn't mean you can't work. This is such an individual couple thing. Like I think in society we try to make it like a one
Cookie
size
cutter.
fits all, right?
Yep,
Like this
cookie
is
cutter, one
what.
size fits all, and you got to match everything you see. I wish those reality shows, some of those things, if we would stop trying to be that what we see and just find out what works for us. But oh my gosh, you just said so much that was so awesome, which is some of the guys that you say, and not that they just run to you, but they look at you like, Auntie, hey, can I just get a woman that will love me, help me, nurture me, help me grow. Like if we're two young people together, let's grow together. But what you said that was so awesome was that God gave us to be the help me, but He also gave us as women. We're women with a womb, and most people are like, I don't want to have babies. Well, we're not talking about that. We're talking about God gave us this womb means something. It means that we have the ability to help bring forth life. And I think we've not, you just tapped into something that is so critical in our lives as women, but I think we've squeezed it tight shut with feminism,
Oh,
liberal, all this liberalism, all this feminism, and we've cut the tap, and we're not being who we're supposed to be. And we're oh my gosh, I can't even speak to it right now because you just tapped into something that is so huge.
it is that feminist thing, that the aspects of it, because we all know it's good for women to vote, and we're not
But
inferior
this
citizens. We get
whole
that.
road that has gone down has hurt us from
Wicked,
being able to be couples.
wicked.
Yeah, it is. Call it what it is. It's wicked. It
Mhm.
is. It is hurt the family structure. And when you say sometimes he just wants to come home and have a home, a home.
Yes, it's perverted. This idea that we can't work or we can't vote and we can't do all these things that are reasonable things for us to be able to function and do, and we can't do that and still serve one another in a home. We can't serve each other. It almost sounds like sometimes women don't even want to sound like we serve.
And I'm
Right.
not saying that
Unless
when
you say that he serves, unless you go back and say he's going to serve me. But right now, if you're talking to a woman, you can't just say, serving him, unless you also say, and he's serving you.
and I'm
It's
not
almost like
saying
that.
that we don't share responsibilities at home. We're not talking about you cook, you clean, you do that. We're not saying that. We're saying there needs to be peace and that you need to find what works in your home. I remember when I was talking with my spiritual children, Jermaine and LaQuinta, and she was talking about how her expectations of what
Oh,
she
she's so
had to
beautiful.
do was lopsided because she saw with her parents, and her husband said, "But I never told her she had to cook every day. I never told her that." How she had a meltdown one day. She was so busy, and it's on. If someone go back and look at the podcast, she said, "I had a meltdown because I, you know, I felt like I had to do it every day, and I was too busy one day." He said, "But I never told her that she had to do that. We had to find time. We had to find a balance." And she said she felt uncomfortable when he brought her plate, and she's like, "Because I just saw my mother serve my dad every day," but they had to find what worked for them with
So
both of
good.
their busy schedules. So
So good.
what we're saying for everyone who's listening is that we are saying that if you come from a situation that
So
has
good.
caused you to not deal with who you are, you can't hop into a relationship with someone. Deal with you, get the help, and we're going to throw up another resource up here since we're talking about lies from that you're taking into a relationship.
Yep.
And I have this, we both have this
Oh,
resource in our
okay.
library, and it's such a powerful
Yes.
resource for you. But what we're saying is, women and men, you need to, when you're into a relationship with someone, if you're taking that toxicity that you haven't dealt with, your relationship is going to struggle so much. You need to go in open, talk, and say, well, I can't say that I put in my relationship what works for Tina and her relationship. I need to talk to my spouse, say, hey, what works in our home?
Right.
Like,
Right.
I give you an example. My husband and I, we both do dishes.
Mm-hmm.
We both, because my husband, he doesn't like dishes in the sink at night. So sometimes if I don't do them, he'll get in there, he'll do them before he comes and gets in the bed.
Well said.
I know there's certain things my husband doesn't do. There's certain things that I do because it's like my little pet peeve. For example, and I'll put him on blast, he doesn't make the bed. But me, old army, I am a army. I'm a military person, and we do not go anywhere without our beds being made. I make the bed. I have the corners cut. I do all that. I don't look. If I leave the house before him, this is when I used to be outside the home. When I leave the house before him, and if I come back and he left after me, he didn't make the bed. People will say that I have OCD. That's fine. My family says sometimes, but
It's
I
okay.
make the bed before I get into it.
There you
I
go.
have to make the bed before I get into it. But that's me. We have learned what works for us. Girl, I don't argue with him about making a bed.
Right.
I don't fight. There'd be
Right.
some people that will cut up. Oh, I don't fight. I don't argue over that bed because that's my thing. But we have learned what works for us in our household. I'm not gonna go to somebody else's house and say, "Girl, your husband don't make the bed. Why don't you make him make the bed?" That's not my issue. I know what works in my home. And women, don't take something from your past, whatever has hurt you, whatever has, and I've learned this the hard way. Tina, Lady T, I will tell you, I learned the hard way about letting other people tell me who my husband should be to me, or letting other people tell me what I'm not capable of being and doing because of mine and my husband's relationship. So that's another thing about this book, Lies Women Believe.
Oh,
I know people might say, y'all are talking about a whole lot, but what we're trying to do by these conversations we're having about Naked Unashamed, it's so much to try to cover, is that we come from a past of things that have hurt us. And if we don't deal with them, it makes our current relationships so heavy, so toxic, and so discombobulated that we can't live.
and it's dysfunctional. And again, it's really it's okay for me to share any of these intimate details, right? Because if we can save someone else from the mindset, right,
Yes.
and divert, it's to the good. But the enemy's desire is to create dysfunctional families. The enemy's desire
Yes.
is for our children. And so that's why we can sit here and take this time, and because it's not personal. Don't take it personal, right? It's a pattern, and it's happening all over. It's not just in one household. It's all over. I remember, like you said, LaQuinta said, I remember breaking down one day. I walked in the house and the tears just came rolling down my eyes. I looked at my kitchen and I was already tired, and there was dishes in it. And it just, no one had done what I told them to do. You know how you just drive home and you want to just sit in the car before you can go in the house. You want to sit in the car just to get your mind together to go in your own home. That's what I did that day. And I was just so upset. And I said, Lord, I cannot. And immediately the Spirit of God said to me, I didn't ask you to. I was saying, I can't do all this. And he immediately said, and it made me go back and examine why I was doing the things that I did and why I was doing it the way I was doing it. And sure enough, like you said, it does have to do with stereotypes and things that we observed. And my grandmother, in my case, or whoever, whatever, they had a whole different life, right? A whole different reality. And I was trying to take that segment of what they did and fit it inside of my life. Like I should, subscribe to that when my life was totally different, right? My whole reality was different. My husband was different. But it matters what we're modeled, and it matters that we look at it and pause to see if it was healthy. Because when we grow up in an environment, we just take it as right. We take it as good. And I'm not talking about being critical. I'm not talking about shaming our parents or anything. But I'm saying our standard is the word. And if you dismiss the word, we can't really have a talk, because anyone who doesn't have some standard, right, then you don't have anything to measure against. If everybody has their own standard, then everybody could be right. So, but when we take the word and we measure even our parents, it's not about critiquing them. It's about saying, okay, this was their preference, but this is what I'm required to do. Similar to in the church, there's many practices, religious things that we do that are not part of the gospel. So if you attach that religious practice and you say, I'm required to do that, then you must be a Baptist, or you must be a Pentecostal, or you must be. I am saying the requirement for salvation is different than the religious practices that we subscribe to.
Exactly.
Freedom. We're talking about getting naked and unashamed so we can live free on purpose, so we can be on our purpose, and we can be set free
to
live the life that God designed us to live, with our unique gifts flourishing and not being hampered and not being held back and not being held to some artificial standard. We're talking about getting back to the true standard. So what has been modeled to us must be examined for the good, and for what maybe was negative or toxic, we have to examine it in the light of day. Right?
Oh my gosh.
When I was a child, I act like a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. Women of God, men of God, be responsible and accountable. Take in what was good. Take in what was good and build upon it. I take what my forefathers did that was good, and we take it as a foundation, all the good, and we build upon it. Because when you don't know, you don't know. But even Maya Angelou said, when we know better, we do better. So that's what it's about. It's not about bashing them, but it's just saying now we know something maybe they didn't know, or we even have a different reality than that they had. I'm not talking about sin is no longer sin, because that's a whole different conversation. We're not saying that, right? And then abused, going into their reactionary space and being toxic. Again, back to, like you said, the feminism, where we don't have this and I don't need him. How can a woman, right, or a man, right, want you in the home, want a marriage, want a relationship, but then discount the value of the other person? So that goes with the help me, Big. High value man, is that this phrase? Okay. High value men. And there's another phrase that women are the prize or something. But the point is, we're all the prize. We're all high value.
Healthy wives, and
you pick someone that you believe is high value, right? That's what you're going to do. You're going to pick someone that you believe is high value, and vice versa. So in that dynamic, neither one is you're high value and I'm just grateful you're here. No, right? Or in that paradigm, you chose the person that you want to be with, that you want to commit to. That's highly valuable to you. The woman, the guy says, he that finds a good wife finds a good thing. No? Yes?
Yes, absolutely.
That's the target. That's the target. That's the target, is healthy and better together. Healthy and better together. Someone that we can grow together. And it looks different. It looks different for everybody, right?
Okay, so but going back to this, because we're talking about, if you don't get healthy, how do you choose healthy? That's because that's what we started talking about. We ended up last week with, you have these traumas, and if you don't use some of the coping skills that we talked about, you don't get healthy. So if you don't get healthy, how do you and know better, to do better, to choose better, I have to hit there. I have to ask you that. How do you choose better? How do you think better to choose better? Because if not, it leads to what we're saying, right? Toxic thinking, toxic relationships, toxic behavior in relationships. Because we're not saying that if you don't get healthy, you can't get into a relationship, because you do, people end up in relationships anyway.
all the
But what
time.
we're saying is, how do you know? My question is, how do you know? How do people choose then? How, if they don't get healthy?
Mm. Well, I can say this for someone who's been married multiple times, right? And really trying to help people from my point of pain, right? Because some people say
I like
that
that, from your point of pain, not just
from my
from
point.
your.
Oh yeah, yeah. Because I don't want people to make the same mistakes I made. I do not want that for anyone, right? So there's one help when I'm going for a mentor, right? I want someone who's highly achieved in that area to tell me what to do, right? That's the person that I'm going to come to and sit at their feet, right? Right, like with my notepad and I'm ready to listen to everything you have to say because you have done this thing. In the area of marriage, there's something unique, that there's something interesting that I've observed as watching this over the years, is that some people will tell you their story and they can't even put together. They're like, oh, they're just so happy and just gleeful. It kind of just happened. They met this person. They don't even have a real, rhythm. I don't know. They met them and these things were just wonderful from day 5. And some people have these innocent stories that they really can't say they went through anything intentional, right? And then some people do. They have something. Well, I thought of this, I thought of that, I thought of the other, or some, the Lord bless. Just so many different stories that you hear. Okay. Matter of fact, I'm going to ask you, B, what's your story? What's your story of getting to healthy? What's your story for that? But I guess what I want to contribute to this conversation is, having come to this stage in my life again, at this point, I've taken the time to look back at my life and observe the patterns and what I did to choose. Um, and I know that one of the principles that I would do is, I think of, well, let's not. I know red flags, like someone who's not trustworthy or someone who lies, or those basic things, and then you look for red flags in relationship, right? And I've come to the point that I'm not looking for red flags in that same way. And I got some beautiful concepts. The book that I shared with you, Becoming the One?
Mhm.
She did a beautiful job in the book. But what I'm going to say is, one of the things that happened to me, because someone says to me, well, tell me what you're looking for. Tell me what you need. Tell me what's important to you, and they're like, because I know we could do this or we could do that. We can build great. But honestly, guys, I'm not looking to give somebody my list. I'm not looking to give someone a list of everything as if because if I give you a list today, I'm going to have to give you a list next month. I'll give you my new list next year. The list that I have is about me. The list that I have is, I'm working on me. I'm developing myself and my person. And it's not even so much the red flags. I'm now at a point where I understand myself. I understand my gifts. I understand my strengths. I understand my skill set. And I'm going to compare it to navigating. Like, you navigate and you get transportation. You could go by a car. You can go by a boat. You can go by airplane, right? And as I notice myself, let's say I'm a person who I have natural gifts in the area of navigating on the water. And I can see that I know how to read maps, and no, I'm just using a metaphor, but the Lord has given me these kind of gifts. And I'm like, wow, I'm made to be on the water. So now I recognize that I'm going to be partnering with someone who's on the water. They're not going to be coming to me in a car. They're not coming to me in the air, right? So even if I see the most beautiful Rolls Royce, if it's a Rolls Royce, it's still not on the water. It's not me. It's not fit for my skill set, my gifts, and what God gave me, and how I'm uniquely made, right?
Mhm.
I'm going to match and fit and connect. That's why it's so important to understand yourself and know yourself, right? And
Mhm.
know who you are and what you bring to the table. It's about that, being able to connect with someone who's
Oh,
going to
that's so
benefit
good.
what I have already. Then I'm not trying to unmake myself. Not trying to remake I am like meat for the task. I am like, oh my goodness, I'm fitting, what they need. And I look back over my
Oh my God.
relationship and I can see how they needed a car. They needed somebody who's able to drive in the car. Or this one needed someone in the air, right? And I'm sitting here talking about maps and nautical, and it's almost all the time, this disjunction, right? I'm bringing skill set that is not, and I'm trying to get them to be able to use my skill sets. and they're trying
And
to get
that's
me
not
to
what
do.
they need. I'll tell you, this is a comical analogy, but I remember my husband, when we were pastoring, he used to teach, he said, look, men, if you know you like a double D, stop looking at a B cup, because you're going to marry a B cup and always looking at those double D's. And I know people be like, oh my gosh, did you just say that?
You just
Yes.
said it. Mm-hmm.
If your flavor is a double D, go find you a double D
Stop.
and stop looking at them B. Stop, don't settle for a B because you like double D, and you're gonna have conflict and friction because
Know
your
yourself.
eyes are gonna be drawn. He used to teach that,
Mm-hmm.
and I
It's
thought
true.
that's great wisdom
Mm-hmm.
because that's
Same
really your
thing with
flavor,
right. Same thing with the woman. Now you're trying
and
to
that's just what you just said about knowing. But it's so important. You hit it. We're so busy trying to size up that person instead of knowing who we are. Because when you know who you are and you prepare yourself, that person's gonna find you because you're whole. We're trying to make ourselves. We're trying to. Oh, they complete me. No, they compliment you after you already whole and you're well and you're healthy.
Mm,
This conversation is about becoming healthy. Then they
mm,
can compliment you. You
so good.
asked me a question.
So good.
What was some of my
So
journey
good.
here? I will tell you, we're in a second marriage, both my husband and I. And one of the things we have both had to work on over these years is letting go of stuff that we both thought we let go of. I don't know if he still see that and working on that journey, but I know I did. Um, and some of the things, and if anyone, I will shameless plug here right now for my book. It's called
All right.
Memoirs of a Survivor. I think you have the book, don't you, Lady
I
T?
do. Mhm.
Memoirs of a Survivor. But even in that book, I tell about some of the things the Lord has grown through me. Um, whether it's not just in my marriage relationship, but it's been some of the things that have happened to me where I've had to deal with my trauma. I've had to deal with some of my past. But in every situation, what I've tried to practice, and it wasn't easy. This is how you mature. You
Mm,
were talking about that. This is how you mature when you know you're growing. I've had to take situations. I say, okay, God, show me
mm,
and show me what you're trying to teach me.
mm,
Because, when things happen, first of all, you're going to look at what are they doing? Why are they doing this? But I've had to learn how to say, what are you teaching me?
me.
What lesson am I supposed to learn? And show me how to be better in this. And how am I supposed to respond? Because, I can be a firecracker. I've said this before in life. I can be a firecracker. I used to have a temper that would light that firecracker and blow up before, but now I try to take a step back, breathe. Okay, I'm not gonna say anything right now. I'm not gonna allow the Lord to temper me and
Right.
to show me. I even have a comment, a couple of things in here where I talk about where the Lord said, "This is what I'm showing you," and this is really what's happening. And the Lord has shown me about how He's teaching me through something. Even when shift what I was doing last year to this year, people, aren't you upset about this? No, God is in control. So when we learn to surrender our will to His will, He'll show us. So through these past years, I've learned to stop thinking about it my way and learn to think about it the Father's way, because ultimately it has to be His way. But when we stay in that toxic way of thinking, I want my way, my will, and it's like having a temper tantrum.
Mm,
Nothing good comes out of laying on the floor having a temper tantrum, that it has to be your way.
mm,
And
mm,
so it comes with surrendering and starting to really find out myself. I found myself, my family would say I'm a perfectionist. My
mm.
family says that
Uh-oh.
I like to have a lot of things, but part of my perfection is I believe that God deserves the best. So
Excellent.
even with being a perfectionist and understanding that God deserves the best, God had to show me, and in your wanting me to have the best, it means letting go of how you see I deserve the best. That was some learning
Ooh,
for me.
that's good. Mm, mm, mm,
He
mm,
said,
mm.
let go. Let me
Mm,
show you what my best is.
mm,
Your best for me is backing up.
mm,
Let
mm,
me say what I want to say. Let me do what I want to do. So there were times that I think my behavior was toxic.
mhm,
And now I believe that my behavior is stepping back and let God. Now,
Amen.
and folks, listen to this. What we're not saying is that you are a roadmap for people to walk on. What we're saying is that you learn yourself. You learn when to speak. Because I'm huge on not living in guilt. I'm huge on knowing when
No
to be
condemnation.
empowered for your yes, knowing your boundaries. But what I am also huge on is knowing when it's the Lord telling you to say, when to move, and when not to move, and just standing and waiting on Him. He fights. The Bible says His name is Jehovah Gabor. He's the God that fights for you. And when you do that, that has what has changed and shifted the atmosphere.
Amen.
I know we didn't start out talking about all deep and spiritual things, but at the basis of everything we do, Tina, Lady T, is the Lord that changes it. It's the Lord that's in control. It's the Lord that takes this that we're holding on to and releases it. But we have to be willing to give it to Him. And so, and He's the one that's gonna change those toxic. He's gonna make things that are toxic. And He's the one that pours His anointing oil and purifies it, right?
He says,
You and
beauty
I
for
both know
ashes.
that.
He said, I will give you beauty for ashes.
Yes.
And he does
Isaiah
it.
60 or 61, is it?
He does it. He knows how to do it. He said, I came to mend the brokenhearted. And this is not just relationally. We broken heart for so many different reasons. But He came to mend it, that we might be healed, that we might be whole. And I just believe that as we press into God, the fruit of the Spirit, and us being real, we don't have time for nonsense and pretense and seeming like we have it together, yet going home crying and hurt, and we don't have time for playing games and the fake and the phony. This is a real salvation, and it is a real deliverance, but you can't get there covering it, right? You can't get there covering. You have to be willing to open up and expose the brokenness. You have to be willing
And
to
this is in
expose
work. This is in work relationships. This is work, because this toxicity that you were talking about, and you're talking about dealing with the trauma in our lives, is work. It's in every area. It's in church. It's in work. It's in just being in public settings. You see people going off in grocery stores. You see people that can't, they're in road rage and on the streets. It's every area of our lives. The toxicity spills out.
because
It's almost like,
relationship is the common thing is interacting with people. That's the common. You
yes,
can't get away from interacting with people, and how we interact with what's happening inside of us, and how we interact with ourselves is, like you said, the overflow,
yes.
and that point about being critical on yourself. If anybody here has dealt with that, it is a very humbling, a very sad place. It's misery, right? To never be satisfied with anything you do, to never feel like you've met the mark,
Wow.
to never feel like you're enough, to always feel like you're trying to earn someone's approval, earn someone's love. That place is death and dying. It's death and dying. That is not functional. That is not healthy. That is not, wherever we got those messages from, anyone who's dealt with that, you can understand when I say it's a beautiful thing to get free from that, to understand that you are. See, this is why it's so hard when you're talking to people about some of these things, and you have to really leave out God, because in the workplace, of course, you do, but it becomes superficial, right? Because at what point can you really understand and respect who you are outside of Him, when everything else falls away? What you've done, your education, where your value and your worth is in what? Right? How do you get someone to that base thing that you really are, simply because He said you are? It's who you are. It's you be who you are, a human being, not just doing. And we associate so much of ourselves to our identity of what we've done. And then those of us who haven't done well, I deal with patients who have had lives that statistically we would say from the womb they were destined to failure, right? They look at their childhood and they were tossed from foster home to foster home and abused in the foster homes, and then physically, sexually came out, drugs, this, that, and here they are, 32 years old, never had a job, they cannot attach their value to their accomplishments, never have custody of their children, never, just everything is one story. They cannot attach them. So when you're trying to bring the value of your person, you are shaped in His image, right? You that's who we are, right? And He's putting you gifts and abilities and talents that now is seed for us. It's seed. It's an opportunity for us to build, to take that and be responsible stewards of what he gave us. Our value is in how he created us and who we are, not just in that you perform well, this performance measure. Freedom from that is a beautiful thing. And then you can release others. So what is happening in people is often what you see spilling out, like you said, in a road rage. You're not, my grandma used to say, you can't get something out that's not in there.
Right.
Right. I don't care who you are. If you take an orange and you keep banging that orange against the wall, you're not going to get chocolate. You're not going to get watermelon juice. You're only going to get orange juice out of the orange. And so when we're put under pressure and something comes out of us, it's God giving us the chance to see the things that need to be purged away, that need to be cleaned out.
Yes. Well, we have to wrap up for this week, but we're going to be back next week to continue talking about how our relationships spill over into our life and how we can be better at dealing with our relationships and being naked and unashamed. Again, Lady T, you know, it is always my pleasure to sit and chat with you. We could talk for hours, but we're going to wrap up for this week and we will be back. Lady T from Trenton, New Jersey, thought leader, mental health nurse, and doing the work on the field, boots on the ground, helping individuals. This is Vera Sadler with VLS Coaching. We will be back next week again to talk about toxicity, healing from trauma, and building relationships and getting better, and just doing what we can do with more resources for you, more ways to help you. If you need help, listen. As you see, you can contact me, contact us at coaching@wolministries.org. If you would like to sow a seed into the ministry, if these conversations are helping you, please sow a seed. I will make sure that part of it goes to Lady T for her help. It's not that I need it, but guess what? Doing business, doing ministry, doing this often, it costs money to help others. It costs money to do business. And I don't usually ask for people to sow a seed, but if our podcast, if our talks are helping you, if it's a way for you to help somebody else, consider sowing a seed. Consider giving back so that we can continue helping others. You can do it at Cash App. My Cash App is scrolling across the screen. It is not, look, ministry costs money. Business costs money. We do this out of the love of our heart because we know that the message has to get across. And it could be your $5, your $10, your $20, your $50, your $100 could be money that helps save somebody's life. So consider today sowing a seed into the ministry. If you need help, inbox me, inbox Lady T. You can find her on Facebook. She is friends with me. Reach out to her, reach out to me. We will be here to help you. So long for now. We'll see you again next week on Tuesday.